Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone to the AfghanEye podcast. Today I am your host and I am joined by a very special guest, Moazzam Begg, who is the ex-Bagram and Guantanamo Bay detainee, author of Enemy Combatant, and now the outreach director at CAGE, which is an advocacy group campaigning against the war on terrorism and the laws therein. And of course we're joined by my co-host and the co-founder of AfghanEye, Sangar. Welcome, Sangar, and welcome, Moazzam Begg. Pleasure to have you.
My pleasure to be with you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam. So, Moazzam, I mean, I remember I was quite vividly following the news, reading the news around about 10, 11 when, you were released in around 2005, it was. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so you've always been someone that's been on my radar, to not sound creepy, but it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. So, we're the AfghanEye platform with the AfghanEye podcast. So, as Afghans, why don't we start off with asking you, what role has Afghanistan played in your life?
I think, Afghanistan has been something that my father's told me about since we were children. He spoke about how we are descendants of the great Mughals, as it were, and that they came from a region where they settled first there and then they moved on. I think Zahruddin Babar is buried in Kabul, for example. And of course, my first thoughts about Afghanistan after that were to do with the Soviet occupation. I was about 17 at the time. Closest I got to anywhere near that, I was in Peshawar at the time when I was a young kid, and relatives there. But I met with several people who'd been affected by what took place. I was greatly taken by the reports by people like Sandy Gall, a famous British journalist who used to go there. And at the time, the Afghan Mujahideen, of course, in the West were highly praised, supported, trained, backed, and so forth. All of that stuff was never seen synonymously with the way it is today. And later, as I started to practice Islam and understand it and to want to become more beneficial to the Muslim community, I made the decision to leave the UK and live in Afghanistan, in Wazir Akbar Khan in Kabul with my family, and help to build schools that were based there. And of course, this was at the time of the Taliban, so that was my first real understanding of living in Afghanistan with my family, though I'd been there before that once or twice.
When had you been? So you moved to Afghanistan, was it in 2001, you said?
Yes, I went in 2001, yeah. In 94, I went to, I met some people who were Kashmiris who'd been fighting against the Kashmiri occupation. And they said they had a camp that was in Afghanistan. So I went there for a few days to go and visit them and see how they were. And again, I was blown away by how their whole sense of standing up, resistance, those who had fought against the Soviets had helped to set up this place. And so for the few days that I was there, I found it fascinating, and I was completely taken by the sense of sacrifice, the sense of honor, the history. Just walking in the Afghan mountains and around Khost and that region, to me was something that stays with me to this day.
So Khost, okay, that's very. I haven't actually visited Khost myself. So whilst you were in Kabul, did you actually manage to visit the Bagh-e-Babur, the site where Babur is buried?
I didn't actually visit, but I did pass it. The place that's still very fresh in my mind at the time when I went to go and see a game of Buzkashi.
Okay.
Which was, people don't know what it is.
That's something I haven't done either. Watch the game of it. So.
Well, it was at Kabul in the stadium, and literally there are horsemen, and these are mostly Turkoman horsemen who are brilliant riders, who literally fight for the. I know it sounds gory, but it's fight for the carcass of a dead goat. But the level of horsemanship goes back to the early days of Mongols and others, and sports like polo and other things that are originated from this region, and it's all to do with furusiya or the chivalric nature of the people and their ability to ride these horses. So watching that was amazing. I went to the famous Kabul Zoo, where you have I don't know if you know the story of the one-eyed tiger.
Yeah, Marjan.
Yeah. Marjan, yeah.
Yeah. The one-eyed lion, I saw the one-eyed lion, and it was a sad affair to look at it to see what happened to it. But it was in its own area, and it was just one lion by itself. It's so different to seeing zoos how you do here in the West. But, they were trying to, despite all of the war, I found fascinating that they were trying to keep the zoo going.
Yeah.
There were bullet marks and bomb craters around the place, but people were still trying to maintain and support these animals.
Okay, so you moved to Kabul in 2001, like you said, when the Taliban were in government. So how did you perceive Afghanistan at the time? So sort of from the outside, once the Taliban had established their rule, and once you were inside, what was sort of the main takeaways that you had?
Okay, I mean, look, obviously at the time, the Taliban's rep, as it were, was already starting to get tainted pretty badly by the West. There was all sorts of accusations about the treatment of women, the attempt to destroy the statues at Bamyan, the war that had been taking place, and so there was all of this stuff happening. But at the time, I believe there were 3 countries at least that recognized them: Pakistan, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. So there was still some kind of relationship. I'd met people over here who were working on projects to build schools and other humanitarian projects, wells and so forth. So they said that you can come along and stay here, and it's an Islamic environment. You can help to build the country, bring in some of your ideas in terms of education, help to bring those into the schools. And so I decided that I was going to go and live there for about a year or so at least. I took my family and we lived. My experience there is mixed. So I came across people who I think were absolutely, in terms of who they were, what they'd gone through, it's hard to describe. I've never met people like that in my life. On the other hand, I did see things that left me shocked. Like, for example, one day I was driving along and coming to this roundabout, and I saw a big crowd of people surrounding the roundabout. At the end of each roundabout exit point was a crane, and at the end of the crane there was a body hanging. These are 4 people that had been executed, and the irony was that they'd been executed for terrorism, because a couple of weeks before a bomb had gone off and they'd accused these guys of being responsible, and they said they were Northern Alliance. So there's all sorts of things that were happening, and so I'm not going to paint a completely rosy picture in one way or the other.
Of course,
but
yeah.
I did understand that there was some security and peace that had come after decades of war, when sadly a lot of the Afghan groups started to fight one another.
Okay, sure. And so these schools that you were building, were they girls or boys' schools?
That's good. There was 2. So there was Madrasa Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Madrasa Khadija bint Khuwaylid. Both of them were separate girls and boys' schools. We had vehicles literally picking up kids, taking them from their homes and dropping them to the school. We bought playground equipment from Iran. We bought computer equipment from next door in Iran. We'd made our own syllabuses. So it was kind of interesting, because though the Taliban technically didn't allow female education, they didn't stop these schools. And I think one of the reasons was, in my mind, is that they were averse to the idea of non-Muslim Western influence, but they weren't averse to the idea of Western Muslim influence.
Okay.
And they didn't oppose that at all. In fact, our vehicles would drive along, pick up girls, take them to school, and the Taliban didn't stop us.
Okay, so I mean that is very interesting, and funnily enough, the discussion about girls' schools and girls' education and women's rights is still a prominent feature of the current sort of discussions that are being shaped, that are shaping this sort of approach to the peace deal signed between the Americans and the Taliban. So it's very interesting that, you know, we're speaking to someone that even in the late 90s and the early 2000s actually has a different experience to what's sort of being propagated out there.